Hi, welcome to this quick tip on the subject of serial music. Well, the first thing to say about serial music is nothing to do with your breakfast cereal. Different kind of cereal, Serial. And this is an area of music that was really led by a group of 20th century composers known as the Second Viennese School. They're headed up by a guy called Schoenberg, who had two pupils, Berg and Webern. And they were kind of responding to something that had been happening in music over the previous decades, which is that music had become so chromatic. In other words, we were using so many notes that didn't belong to the key that we started to lose any sense of which key we were in. So Schoenberg decided to organise a new system to replace major and minor scales and keys. And it's this that we're just having a quick look at in this film. So Schoenberg's idea was basically this, that we have equal rights for all 12 notes of the scale. So instead of having C major, which uses those notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, he says, well, what about all these other notes that we haven't used in that scale? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could use all these 12 notes? So this is something we know as a chromatic scale when we use all the notes like that, isn't it? But Schoenberg decided to organise them in some kind of order depending on which piece he was writing. So you end up with something we call a note row or a tone row that maybe looks like this. So what I've got here is every single chromatic note of the scale, but organised in some order of the composer's choice. So this is how this note row goes. So you'll notice that across those 12 notes, there's one example of every single chromatic note of the scale, every single semitone. And the composer's job is to organise that into a satisfactory note row. Then you can use these notes going forwards, or you can use them going backwards. So if you use them going forwards, that's in its original form, what we call O. If you use it backwards, well, we say you're using it in retrograde, what we refer to as R. Or you can invert all the intervals. In other words, turn all the intervals upside down. So instead of starting with C and going up a minor third, you can start with C and go down a minor third. And you can invert all of the intervals like that. And then we say we've got the row in inversion, for which we abbreviate I. Then you could also use it in retrograde inversion. So in other words, you can invert all the intervals, turn them all upside down, and do the whole row backwards. So you can use the row forwards, you can use it backwards, you can use it upside down, and you can use it upside down and backwards. And you can take any of those presentations of the row and transpose any way you want to. If you use it rigidly, as Schoenberg tended to do, then you weren't allowed to repeat a note until the whole row was completed. In the hands of Berg, actually sometimes it's much freer. But there we are. It's a little introduction to serial music. Serial music is something that lots of people don't find very easy to access, but at least that's a quick explanation of how the system works. So if you want to play some serial music or listen to it, you've got some idea how things happen. A composer is entirely free to do what they want to do with the rhythm, to compile chords as well as melodies using the row. You can pile up notes into a chord if you want to. Composers later in the 20th century decided to serialize other things. So if you want to get into Pierre Boulez, for example, you can discover how rhythm and sound, all sorts of things are also serialized. But for today, that's our introduction to how serial music works.